Hi, everybody!
When I was a kid, DNA Digivolution was easily one of the coolest things from the anime. When they added it in Digimon World 2, I was really excited for it. However, that didn't work in a way I was able to figure out when I was renting the game as a preteen. To give myself some credit though, the first three Digimon games on the PlayStation 1 were notorious for not bothering to explain mechanics. They kind of had the mentality of smash your head against this brick wall and figure it out, kid. To this day, I've never been able to do a complete playthrough of any of them. I did manage to get close with Digimon's World 1 and 3 though, since I actually owned them. Anyways, Digimon World 3 did manage to incorporate DNA Digivolution in a way you could actually figure it out as a youngster. In fact, not only is the third game the most accessible of the PS1 titles in terms of how it plays and what it expects you to do, but it's also the game where the formula that would become Digimon Story games was established. I know I'm babbling at this point, so let's stop burying the lead. DNA Digivolution is finally returning in a form that is going to make party composition much more interesting. This wasn't a feature Bandai Namco or any other Digimon creator had discussed until recently. This was discovered by Omnionprime during their time with Time Stranger at Anime Expo. Up until this point, you'll have seen the little bit of footage they managed to grab looped, so a link for their Twitter account will be in the description. But I really want to discuss this further, as I think this is going to not only really impact how you build your team during the early to mid portion of the game, but also how useful I think the mechanic itself is going to be. As you can see from Omni on Prime's footage, the party is comprised of an XVmon and a Stingmon. These two can DNA Digivolve into Imperialdramon, which just so happens to be one of my favorite Digimon, especially when it's in Dragon mode. What can I say? I've always loved big dragons. Clearly, for this to happen though, both Digimon needed to be in the party to pull this off, and it's only temporary. And you get both back at the end of the sequence. I could see this being used similarly to limit breaks in Final Fantasy, or akin to S-Crafts from the Trails franchise. Nice ways of finishing off fights when things look desperate or when you really need to let out some big damage because your party composition either isn't ideal or you just want to get through scrub mobs quicker. Since you're getting both Digimon back, it wouldn't surprise me if this took a lot of the SP from either one or both partnered Digimon, which makes sense from a balance perspective. But this really will impact team composition when you think about it. While I don't know how many DNA Digivolutions are going to be possible in this game, we do know there will be at least 450 total Digimon at launch, with more coming later as DLC. This is also going to impact team composition well into the late game, though I imagine it'll have the most impact during the early to mid stages of the title, while you're still running champion level monsters like Stingmon and the others, since the vast majority of DNA Digivolutions take to champion level Digimon. During that portion, having just one ultimate level monster can really be the difference between getting through a battle fast or slogging it out for a good long while. When it comes to the late game, the gap between having a Mega to Ultra tends to be less of a large gap. So while merging your War Greymon and Natolka Rurumon into Omnimon temporarily will be a boost, it won't be a massive one. But okay, it will be relatively game-changing in the early stages. But how else is this going to impact things? Well, when you consider the Digimon that results from a permanent DNA Digivolution is going to be a good deal better stats-wise than what I imagine we're going to get from the temporary version. I could be wrong, of course, but I imagine Bandai would rather you make use of the temporary and permanent versions, with the permanent one likely having a much larger SP pool along with generally better stats, thus making fights a good deal easier to manage. But either way, it is nice to see a feature that first debuted in Digimon World 3 returning, since I did find that to be a lot of fun to utilize when I was a kid. Now that we've covered how the mechanic is going to work, along with how I think it's going to make the early to mid portions of the game far easier, let's discuss how useful I think this mechanic is going to ultimately be. I think long term, it's going to fall off in terms of viability. As I covered in the previous segment, I think it's going to ultimately peter out in the late stages of the game. when the Digimon you're fighting against fight smarter and harder, though it could still be a useful get off me button if you think one or both Digimon won't survive into the next turn. We also don't know if this will end up healing both Digimon or if it's a quick burst for damage. We're just going to have to wait and see what Bandai Namco shows us next, which I imagine we're going to see sometime during Tokyo Game Show, as that'll just be a few weeks before the launch of the full game. As a whole, though, I think it's going to be a very viable feature, as it'll encourage you to get way more experimental with your team composition. Plus, you could probably do it multiple times per battle with multiple partners, meaning should you have a whole bunch of combinations which are capable of DNA digivolving, you could do this multiple times and potentially use this to disrupt the turn order a whole lot, which overall is just a very useful thing to have in a turn-based JRPG. Just look at how The Legend of Heroes manages this. If you have characters built with delaying the opponent in mind, you can really break the game. In fact, that build was the most meta for Reen throughout the majority of the Cold Steel games, since the orbments that had delay effects stacked with his crafts that also caused delay. Sometimes, this would mean you'd never give the opponent a turn. I could actually see this being a possibility in Time Stranger through DNA Digivolution if you have a group of really fast Digimon who also have a super fast form when merged. I don't think this is going to ultimately be the meta we see in Time Stranger, but I do think this could be a useful mechanic. It's just too bad we aren't going to see how this could have impacted competitive Digimon, since that functionality has been removed from the game. I'm currently working on a video discussing why that's a massive disappointment, so subscribe if you want to see that video when it drops. So what do you think of the inclusion of temporary DNA digivolution within Time Stranger? I really think this is going to be cool, and I'm excited to use it. But do let me know in the comments. Want more of my Digimon content? Then check out one of my previous videos, and until next time, keep blazing that trail.